All right, guys, in today's video, we have some interesting next-gen console news and info to go over and talk about. The first thing we're going to be getting into has to do with the PlayStation 5, the configuration when it comes to the clock speeds and the hardware shape. These were things that were decided 2 years ago, and not only do I find this interesting, but I also find it pretty telling because I'm sure many of you are aware that there have been certain individuals who have attempted in the past to make it sound as though Sony created the PS5, and the PS5 is what it is today because they were in panic mode. They were reacting to everything that Microsoft was doing with the Xbox Series X and the 12 T-flops of power and whatnot. I never saw it that way. I never looked at it as Sony was in some type of panic mode or reacting and making major last-minute adjustments. To me, it just seems clear that they decided to go a different direction, and we now have proof of that from the lead engineer, I believe, over there at Sony, who worked on the PS5, letting us know this. So we're going to talk about that, and we're also going to talk about another game that was revealed running on the next-gen Xbox consoles, that game being Yakuza Like a Dragon, which is a current-gen game that is getting an upgrade for both next-gen consoles. But what's absolutely insane to me is it has actually come out that Yakuza Like a Dragon cannot run at 1080p 60 frames per second on the Xbox Series S. Now, yes, we're talking about the S model, not the X. It would be a huge problem if it couldn't do 1080p 60 on the X. But even looking at the Series S, this is supposed to be a next-gen console that can, at the bare minimum, do 1080p 60. And I've seen people kind of point the finger at the developers of the game, saying it's poorly optimized and it's their fault. While I do think there may be some truth to that, I think people are being a bit too defensive and not realizing that this is not looking good when it comes to how much of a struggle it seems that developers are having fully optimizing for the next-gen Xbox console. Now, I do think there is a reason for that, and we're going to get into that later. It's going to make for an interesting conversation. I know it's going to, inherently, due to the nature of it, upset some people, but still, I think this is pretty interesting. And I know some people are going to think that I'm nitpicking, but I'm really not, because if I heard something like this come out, like not as a rumor, but a fact, like a game couldn't run at 1080p 60 FPS on the PS5, we would have to have a conversation about that because that's not good. So yeah, if you could do me a favor before we get into it, make sure you hit the like button. If you do end up enjoying it or finding it informative, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell notification icon as well. But we're starting with the PlayStation 5, and this was an interview that was conducted with Yasuhiro Otori. I believe he is the lead engineer over there when it comes to the console's mechanical and thermal design. So he had some interesting things to say when he was asked about the console's overall design and the decisions that were made. And he said, "We started preparing for the adoption of liquid metal TIM about 2 years ago when the PS5 hardware configuration and shape were roughly decided. In addition to design, we have begun various studies towards the adoption of TIM for liquid metals, from the manufacturing process to procurement." Yasuhiro Otori also discussed why they went for liquid metal cooling for the PlayStation 5, confirming that it was chosen due to the high operating frequency and small die size. The reason for trying to use the liquid metal TIM is that the main processor, SoC, has a high operating frequency, but the die is small and the heat density is very high. In particular, the heat density of SoC during games is much higher than that of the PS4, he said. That's because the PS5's SoC basically runs at almost full power during games. Therefore, the value of TDP, or thermal design power, and the amount of heat generated during the game are almost the same. During the same interview, Yasuhiro Otori also confirmed that the PlayStation 5's size is due to the fan size, as the large fan was required to cool both sides of the console equally. Installing two smaller fans would have made the console smaller, but the current design would have made it difficult to control them with the console's current design, and it would have increased the production costs. So some very interesting information that's being revealed here. Again, he's letting us know that these design decisions when it comes to the clock speeds, the smaller die, all this stuff that Mark Cerny already discussed back in March, these were not last minute decisions. These were decisions that were made years ago, And I think that has always kind of been obvious, but again, there are those individuals who have tried desperately to make it seem as though the PS5 is some kind of last minute thrown together console that's being, overclocked to the max for, no other reason than to just hit that 10 T-flop number, when I really don't think that's the case. People will believe what they want, obviously, and, if that was the case, yeah, Sony would not come out here and just straight up say, oh yeah, that's what we did. But to me, it seems very clear that every single design decision that was made from top to bottom with the PS5 is very much intentional, regardless of what people want to think and what they want to say. Because in my opinion, all you have to do, if you don't want to believe Mark Cerny, if you don't want to believe the lead engineer of the PS5, you don't want to listen to anybody else, just look at the results. Look at what you're seeing in front of your face. Are these the results that you would be getting from a console that was kind of thrown together at the last minute and was just kind of like, made out of panic reaction due to what the competition is doing? No, I really don't think you would. So yeah, I find this interesting, and he's talking a little bit about the fan here. Obviously the fan is massive, and the fan is the reason why the console is so large. But he did make it clear that if they wanted to, they could have went with 2 smaller fans to make the console smaller, but apparently due to the design and the nature of this console, it would have made it pretty difficult to get that under control or have it work properly. So it just sounded like it would have been pretty risky. And overall, I'm really happy with the PlayStation 5's design, mainly because it seems like Sony, and this is maybe an area where Microsoft and their engineering team versus Sony and their engineering team, there's just different philosophies. It really does seem like to me, Sony decided that they were just going to build the hardware, like they were going to decide on the specifications and get exactly what they wanted, and then build the form factor and focus on the form factor after all that was locked in. To whereas with Microsoft, it almost seems like they kind of set it up where we want to, make it this big and no bigger than this, and it has to be this small and this compact, and we have to find a way to work around that and make it work, which they did. I think the Series X is impressive, for that type of power and what it's offering and being in such a small form factor, but we have heard reports that it does get pretty hot apparently. Now, I don't think that's going to be a problem, but that's one thing that I am actually really grateful that Sony decided, where they're like, we don't care how big the console is. We don't care if it's the biggest console in history. We don't care if it's the heaviest console in history. We just want it to work and we want it to function properly. And they just went all in with ensuring that, cooling is not ever going to be an issue. And that gives me, a bit of reassurance, honestly. So really interesting stuff there, but we are going to move on and talk about Yakuza Like a Dragon. It says, how well will next-gen games run on the Xbox Series S? As of now, it remains somewhat of an open question. Aside from a trailer showing Dirt 5 running on the Series S, the abilities of Microsoft's less powerful next-gen console are mostly being kept under wraps. Well, now we have further details about the Series S's power, or lack thereof, as the Sega has, I don't know why they said the Sega, has revealed the resolution and frame rate we can expect for Yakuza Like a Dragon, and how it's going to run on the system, and the numbers are not that impressive. Apparently, Yakuza Like a Dragon will offer 2 graphics modes on the Xbox Series S. One that runs at 1440p at 30 frames per second, and one that offers 900p at 60 frames per second. Yes, that's right. If you want 60 FPS, Microsoft's next-gen console won't be able to hit that 1080p mark. So yeah, let's continue reading this article before I talk more about this. Yakuza Like a Dragon only running at 900p on the Xbox Series S really stands out, as the game isn't exactly a graphical powerhouse. It's a turn-based RPG with visuals that look more or less on par with current-gen Yakuza games. No cutting-edge effects, crazy architecture, or super huge crowds to render. If the Series S can't do Yakuza at 1080p at 60 FPS, more ambitious games like Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War or Cyberpunk 2077 definitely aren't going to get there. Haven't been keeping up with Yakuza Like a Dragon, and so they, give their thoughts on what the game. Apparently, the game's really good from what I've heard, but they're making a pretty bold assumption here. They're saying at the end here that if a game like Yakuza cannot hit 1080p 60 FPS, then there's no way these bigger, more graphically intense games such as Call of Duty, Black Ops Cold War, and especially Cyberpunk 2077, there's no way those games are going to hit 1080p 60 FPS. Now, I feel like they are jumping the gun here a little bit, because this is the question that needs to be asked right now. Is this a hardware problem, or is this a developer problem? Now, the reason why I think some people are getting a little bit too defensive about this recently is because this is a recurring theme we are seeing from Microsoft's next-gen consoles, and I do believe we have an answer as to why. It's not an official answer, and we really won't know unless a developer comes out and straight up talks about it, but I don't think they're allowed to. I think it's because Microsoft switched their dev kits, basically, or their tool set to their SDKs, I believe, from the XDK to the GDK. And the big difference there is the XDK tool set basically was just focus on the Xbox console, and these tools are specifically made for the Xbox console, to where when you shift over to the GDK, it's a much wider tool set, a much broader tool set, and it's similar to a PC-like environment. And because of that, you have a lot of different configurations you have to work with and a lot more optimization to worry about. And I think that that's going to be a problem. To be completely honest, and I'm not saying this to hate on Xbox because people think that's what I'm doing. I'm not. I would be talking about this if Sony was having the same issue, and if we saw some things coming out that were clearly pointing at an issue behind the scenes. This is seeming like it's an actual issue for developers, is that because Microsoft has switched over to the GDK development, SDK and whatnot, it seems like they're having a difficult time really optimizing properly for these next-gen consoles. You know, people really came out of the woodwork to defend Dirt 5, and I get it. I get it. It's not that it was, incredibly unimpressive. I mean, some people thought it looked terrible. I don't think it looked terrible, but I think people are not being completely honest, and we need to be honest and say that it didn't really stand out that much either. It just looks like okay, right? And, obviously the developers are working really hard to make their game look as good as it can, but we have yet to see something that looks genuinely very impressive on the Series X or the Series S. Now, the Series S in particular is a console that a lot of people have been concerned about because they're like, is this thing going to hold back games? Well, regardless of whether or not it ends up holding back games in the long run, we're going to have to wait to see about that. It's becoming clear to me that developers are having a difficult time fully optimizing their games for the next-gen Xbox consoles. It seems like it's going to take them time to really be able to fully, get used to this new development environment. And I don't know if it's maybe because it's creating a lot more work for them. They just don't want to do it. And I don't like that, because if that is the case, you already know what's going to happen. All these Xbox dudes are going to point the finger. They're going to say it's the developer's fault. It's the developers. And it's like, not necessarily. When you have Sony coming out here basically saying, here's one console, one spec, this is all you have to worry about. So any work that the developers have to put in, they know it's just going to have to be for one spec. That's all they have to worry about. Whereas with Microsoft, they're throwing all these different specs on your plate, and you have 4 or 5 different specs you have to optimize for. I'm not a developer, but I'm going to assume that sounds like a headache, to the point where you're just like, let's just do the best we can and call it a day, because this is ridiculous. And I feel like that's what we're seeing here with Yakuza. People can blame the developers all they want, but let's face the facts here, guys. This game runs at 1080p 30 FPS on the PS4, or the PS4 Pro, I believe. You're going to tell me that it cannot do 1080p 60 FPS? We're still seeing a game running at 900p on a next-gen Xbox console? Something tells me that, look, if we see this game hitting 900p 60 FPS on the PS5 as well, then I'm going to be more inclined to believe maybe it really is just the developers at this point. But I'll tell you right now, if it's running more than that, if it's hitting, say, 1440p 60 FPS or something like that on the PS5, then things are just not looking good for the Series S, man. Look, I understand that there are Xbox individuals who just want to jump on the defense, but I'm just being 100% honest with you right now when I say, if it was Sony doing this, if Sony had an S model of the PS5 and I saw that some games were struggling to hit 1080p 60 FPS, I would genuinely be frustrated and question, why did you make this console if this is the result we're going to see? You're just making it apparently more difficult for developers to optimize their games. And I know it's early, but that's not an excuse. It's not. I'm tired of people making excuses. That's the whole thing here. That's all it seems to be anymore when it comes to any time there's anything that maybe is questionable over on the Xbox side of things. I've seen so many people get just super defensive and make excuses. And it's like, let's not make excuses. Okay, because the truth is Microsoft has 2 next-gen consoles. One of them has already created controversy because it's bringing up questions. Do we have to worry about this holding back games? And you see some developers saying they're worried about the RAM and the memory, and you see others saying it's going to be fine. So that already creates controversy. But then we're sitting here about a month before launch, and we're finding out that a current gen game can't even hit 1080p 60 FPS. Are you kidding me? I'm sorry, if this was PlayStation, I would be literally scratching my head saying, what is going on right now? How can this be a thing? How are we hearing about a 900p title in 2020 on a quote-unquote next-gen Xbox console? You know what? Here's the thing, and this is the point I tried to make in my last video talking about Dirt 5. Even if you still think that everything I said is really dumb, like, wow, you're just a fanboy and you clearly hate Xbox and you will nitpick anything Xbox does, you know what? I'm going to point this out. And frankly, I don't think anybody can argue this. If Microsoft knew, and surely they had to have known, if they knew that this game was only going to run at 900p 60 FPS on the Series S, maybe don't send that game out for people to play and test. That's a thought. Maybe kind of hide that, because that just really isn't what you need right now. And that's something that if it comes out later on, when we find out there isn't any development issues, and most other games can run at 1080p 60 FPS no problem, then maybe you put it out. So you can argue with me and say, no, it's the developer's fault, but it's Microsoft's fault that we're even having this conversation in the first place. So that's going to do it for the video, guys. Turned out way longer than I expected, but I hope you did enjoy it. Obviously got a little bit ranty, but I'm sorry, man. I see so many people throwing stuff my way these days, and I'm like, you guys are talking about this, you're talking about that, but you're blatantly ignoring the fact that we have yet to see anything that even looks like something that could be considered next gen running on either of these next gen Xbox consoles. And that's just the reality, man. So there you go. Yakuza Like a Dragon, 900p on the Xbox Series S. So how exciting. Anyway, leave the video a like if you did enjoy it. Leave your thoughts down in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel if you're new and haven't already. Hit the bell notification icon so you never miss an upload. And feel free to share this video out on top of all that. But until next time, guys, take care.